welcoming remarks. So welcome everyone on today's webinar, and thanks a lot for everyone who joined. Thanks for the Böll Stiftung for the support, for the cooperation around this project. And on today's webinar, we are going to discuss the upcoming European parliamentary elections and the future of the Eurosceptic forces in the campaign and after the campaign. And I'm really glad that we will have some brilliant speakers here with us who can share experiences from Poland, from Italy, also from Germany and France as well. So thank you, Carolina, Steven, Zsuzsanna, and Gwendolyn for being here with us. So I'm Peter Krakow, the director of Political Capital Institute, and I'm just running the welcoming first round of welcoming remarks. I will pass over the floor soon to Adela Jurečková, who is the head of the Heinrich Böll Foundation in Prague. Then my colleague Rudolf Berkes will deliver a short presentation of the main findings of the study that we are going to prepare. And then Bulcsú Hunyadi, the head of programs at Political Capital Institute, will moderate a discussion in the topic. So without further ado, my colleagues have a lot of important things to say, so I don't want to keep up your precious time further. So I would just like to pass over the floor to Adela. And thanks everyone again for joining us today.
Thank you, Peter, and good afternoon, everyone. Let me welcome you to this event also in the name of the Heinrich Böll Foundation, the Prague office, who is happy to be the co-organizer of this event. In the name of our long-term partnership with Political Capital, we have been focusing on the far right and on right-wing populism in Hungary since many years. And we did together a lot of solid analysis, which I'm really happy for this collaboration. And we have been following how the strategies and narratives of Viktor Orbán have also spread among other authoritarian politicians in the EU and beyond. And only the most recent example is Robert Fico in Slovakia, but we see other examples also in Western Europe and elsewhere. That's the first point. Then in the last year, Hungary, of course, has been increasingly isolated in the EU and in the Visegrad 4. Even the strong alliance with Poland has crumbled since the Russian invasion to Ukraine, and likely this will continue with the change of the government. But new allies are already here or on the horizon. And as current polls suggest, the power balance in the EU could shift more towards the bloc of Eurosceptic, populist, or even radical right parties after the election to the European Parliament next year. And the liberal democratic actors, from political parties to civil society organizations who are used to see the European Commission and the Parliament as a bulwark of or against nationalist populism and authoritarianism of their own governments, might suddenly find these populists and autocrats increasingly represented and also more united in these very institutions. And this is a real danger. And that's why we are all here, because we see the danger not only for European unity, but also for progressive policies in fields such as human rights, climate protection, or foreign policy. And even though I still hope that European voters won't let this happen, it is crucial to be prepared for such a possibility. And in order to do that, I think it's very useful to make ourselves more familiar with the networks that Viktor Orbán and other illiberal populists in Europe are creating, and to discuss strategies and good practices, how to build stronger alliances among democratic and pro-European forces. In other words, how to defend this bulwark. I hope that the excellent analysis of Political Capital and the expertise and insights from our speakers will help us find ways how to do that. And I would like to thank Political Capital for preparing the analysis, for organizing this event, to our speakers and attendees for joining. And I'm really, really looking forward to our discussion.
Thank you. I will be sharing my screen, and I will be talking about our recent study and our findings. Just a bit. Yes, so I will be talking about the state and outlook of the populist radical parties in Europe ahead of the European Parliament elections. And my main takeaways will be the following: that there are advances but not breakthroughs in the European in the party's support, and there have been so again, there have been advances but no breakthrough for populist radical parties across Europe, mainly in Italy and most notably in Germany. My second point will be that there is an increasing mainstreaming of radical positions and the reapproachment with Eurosceptic parties, especially with the European Conservatives and Reformists groups. Again, at the forefronts are Italy in this sense and Germany. And my third point will be that Fidesz still has a dream of creating an overarching right-wing coalition in the European Parliament and also in the European Council and among member states. And despite all the counterfactual evidence that has been presented to it. So about my first point, that there is an advance in these parties' popularity, we can see in Europelect's latest projection about the next setup of the European Parliament that the ECR group could gain some significant ground in the next European Parliament. But again, a heavy caveat here that we are still 7 months away from the actual elections, and these are just projections compiled from national polling. So there is a huge variety and can be a great distance from the real elections as well. But this can provide us with some insight on how these parties are performing right now and how these groups are performing right now. As we can see, ECR could advance to the third or even fourth or even third place in the European Parliament. And especially if Fidesz would join the ECR and especially ECR would accept Fidesz's application to its grouping, then ECR could have almost 100 MEPs in the next European Parliament. However, the state of the negotiations are still unknown, so we cannot really say whether the Brothers of Italy and PiS would allow Fidesz into this group. So the main reason behind these populist radical right advances is that is twofold. On the one hand, Brothers of Italy has been poaching away voters from its governing coalition partner, Salvini's League, and this would mean that there will be a transfer of MEPs in the next European Parliament from League's group of the ID to Brothers of Italy's group in the ECR. And this could amount to more than 15 MEPs, and this is the main reason behind ECR's growth in numbers. However, the ID group can compensate its losses thanks to the Alternative for Germany's growth in the polls. So they have been doubling their support over the last one or 2 years, from 10% to 20%, and this could mean that they would have 14-15 more MEPs in the next European Parliament compared to 2019. Additionally, there has been an increased cooperation efforts among these parties, and especially between the ECR group and the Identity and Democracy group over the last 2 years, especially since Fidesz's departure from the EPP. There has been meetings and joint declarations until the Russian invasion of Ukraine in early 2022. Prior to that, there was common topics with hidden differences between these parties. For example, there was these overarching friction between peace and the national rally about Russia mainly, and the Russian invasion naturally brought up these divisions between mainly the ECR parties and the ID parties, especially between, as again, Law and Justice Party and the Brothers of Italy, and between National Rally and League and the League Party in Italy, and of course Fidesz as well. But yes, and there has been also we could also see some divisions among immigration policy, especially as Hungary and Poland has voted against the Council's position on the new migration pact, while the Italian government has been supporting it. So there is another division behind these common topics. Another two interesting topics that I want to mention is the cost of living and the climate change topic, as these topics can be seen as the common denominators between the ECR and EPP parties as well. So on these topics, there could be we saw some cooperation between EPP and ECR in the European Parliament on especially climate change and environmental protection legislation. Although this seems to be an ad hoc cooperation and mostly a tactical move by the EPP to soften up these regulations, and not an overarching cooperation. Again, my second point is that since there won't be a radical right alliance between ECR parties and ID parties in the next European Union, there has been increased cooperation efforts or like approachment efforts from the ECR towards the EPP, and that are close that these groups are moving closer, or at least it's the leadership of the EPP with Manfred Weber wants to have a closer ties to the ECRs on some positions, including climate change and migration, as these parties have been taking up some further hardline stances on migration, especially, and sometimes on climate change even. One thing that supports this reapproachment that there are already existing coalitions between ECR and EPP parties at the national level. Thus, this is a fertile ground to advance this cooperation. And also, again, the leadership of EPP, despite the inside and external pushback, it has been trying to maintain closer relationship, especially to the Brothers of Italy. And there has been rumors that Manfred Weber wants to poach Meloni from the ECR party or the ECR group. However, this has not materialized, mainly as the German Conservatives and other core EPP member parties have been heavily criticizing him over this idea. So all in all, the cordon sanitaire against these parties seems intact now, but the increasing signs of closeness between the conservatives and the radicals are giving us a food for thought and something to worry about, and something to look more closely in the future as well. Overall, as I said, since the overall composition of the European Parliament is unlikely to change, then the most likely outcome is still the grand coalition between the mainstream parties is likely to continue. However, we could see some ad hoc coalitions and ad hoc collaboration between EPP and ECR parties, possibly with parts of Renew Europe also joining on some issues. But the overarching right-wing coalition seems unlikely at this point. Nevertheless, Fidesz still has a dream of establishing such a super group because it wants to ensure the long-term survival of the regime itself and create a favorable international environment to operate in, degrading the competencies of the European Union institutions and creating a so-called Europe of nations approach, which would see mainly an economical cooperation in the EU, but not political one, thus protecting the interest of the Hungarian regime and avoid its further marginalization in Europe. Thus far, these cooperation efforts has seen limited success, as there is currently no need or no idea of such a supergroup to exist, and even ECR ruled out such a supergroup with ID to be happening anytime soon, citing mainly the differences about Russia and Ukraine, and as Russia's aggression is not going to fade away anytime soon, on this division and distance will not be eliminated either. Additionally, as Fidesz wants to join ECR, this raises the question: and how could an ECR comprising Fidesz cooperate with EPP, and thus Fidesz joining ECR would likely scare away any EPP initiative regarding their cooperation. And again, despite the victory of Robert Fico in Slovakia, Hungary has lost its main ally in the European Council and in the European Parliament as well, in form of the Polish government, which is likely to be replaced by Donald Tusk's coalition. That was all I wanted to talk about, and I will give you the floor, Blue. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Rudolf. Thanks for this presentation. I think it gives us a lot to discuss in our panel discussion, and I have the privilege and the honor to moderate the following panel discussion, which I think will be a great discussion with excellent speakers. We have with us MEP Gwendolyn Delbos-Corfield, who is member of the European Parliament for the Greens and IFA group. We also have Steven Forti, who is a lecturer at the Universitat Autonoma de Barcelona. We also have Zsuzsanna Weg, visiting fellow at the German Marshall Fund of the United States. She is based in Berlin. And we also have Karolina Zbitniewska with us, who is editor-in-chief at Euroactiv Poland, euroactiv.pl. And I forgot to mention, which I think is important, that even though Steven is based in Barcelona, he is Italian from origin. So we, I think, have the honor to have a very broad perspective in terms of speakers coming from different countries, having different perspectives and backgrounds. And so I think the only limitation we can have in our panel discussion is the time, since we have excellent speakers. We have had a presentation with a lot of content to discuss. However, we only have approximately 50 minutes for our discussion. We definitely want to leave some space for the audience asking questions. And I also would like to emphasize that we are collecting questions in the Q&A box in Zoom. So during our discussion, you can ask your questions in a written form in the Q&A box. And after this discussion of approximately 50 minutes, there will be enough space and time to answer your questions by our panelists. I prepared actually two kind of round of questions. We will see how much time we will have. I also, of course, will be happy if our panelists reflect or comment on what has been presented by my colleague Rudolf. But certainly I will, of course, be happy if you can answer my questions, of course, react also on the statements of each other. So the first round of question will concern the status quo, the state of play. So the current situation of Eurosceptic, sovereignist, populist, radical right parties in Europe and in different countries. And my first question would go to Ms. Delbos-Corfield. And I would like to ask you, how do you see the position and perception of these Eurosceptic, sovereignist, populist, radical right parties in the European Parliament and probably also in other European institutions today? How do you see whether other actors do cooperate with these parties, what impact these parties have on policies or policymaking, and what impact they have on politics?
Yes, hello everyone. So indeed, Gwendolyn Delbos-Corfield, member of the European Parliament in the Green Group, and working most of all on rule of law issues, very linked to, of course, these ideological questions and the divide between progressive and right and far right. So first thing is, what place do they have in the European Parliament? We have a shift since clearly 1 year and a half, and maybe even more since this summer. 1 year and a half is an official shift, a clear shift, where EPP made the conscious decision with the help of Renew also on some topics to work with ECR and to include ECR in the majorities of the votes and to have them around the table at a number of moments where in former terms or at the beginning of this one, they would not have been invited around the table. So they have taken a more important place. The feeling that there was a very strong force behind them, behind peace, behind the Italian with the election of Milioni and all of this meant that they looked like a group not only that was getting stronger, but was also, in fact, getting mainstream because these ideas could be mainstream. And so there's been a sort of the EPP now in its head is making more and more the separation between ID and ECR, and no more ID and ECR together. ECR with a wrong analysis for some of them, because I think that there's a real part of them that is far right in their ideas, but it is true also that one part of ECR is very difficult to determine in what they do. Now, also, polls came out this summer showing that they will become even stronger. We were very minorized, for example, the Greens in these polls, but not only us. And so when we came back in September in Parliament, it was very clear that these fantasy, these rumors about having a far right majority in this Parliament, very strong one, was very present in everyone's minds. And it also then had an effect on Social Democrats, where they basically were already defeated. We were in September and they were already saying, you know, this is dramatic, what can we do? And now, but now we will have 5 years of darkness, basically, and we need to just prepare to resist to these 5 years of darkness, which I think was much too early to be already defeated in September. And indeed, history has shown that they were wrong. So that's one thing in the influence. The influence in other institutions, I would say, is more difficult, of course, to perceive. In Commission, some of them are going to be very bad influence, like Olivier Varelli from Fidesz, Hungarian commissioner, in the acts, but he doesn't have a lot of influence in the Commission. He's a pariah in the Commission itself, in the college, but the fact is that he doesn't do what he's supposed to do. And indeed, in the Balkans, talking about Israel, Palestine, and all this. He had a few times words that were very problematic for someone that is supposed to represent EU, and some of them are very shy, not shy, but I mean they don't do much, so they are not very active in the Commission. It's the Council very clearly. It is difficult to act with these member states. Specifically, it was difficult to act with peace for a long time. It has become more and more difficult to act with Orbán, of course, so that's nothing new. They would from time to time do alliances, but they were not always doing alliances. And someone there seems to me more dangerous than the others, of course, and this is Giorgia Meloni, because indeed she's playing the game very well, and she is trying to give the impression that she will never be a problem, while at the moment she is indeed trying to take out some of the values, substantive values that counts for her. So that would be what I'm thinking. I do hope that the vote, so that's to give a state of play on how, the influence that they have. I do hope that with the elections in Poland, and a few things happening, there will be a surge of fighting spirit coming back, and that in fact this prediction of a very far-right majority, influenced majority in the parliament will not be true, and that we will see people win some elections, European elections. So I'm not that defeatist at all. I think that the socialists also are coming back a bit in the fight. And I will just want to finish on one specific example. There are topics where we are not coming back, to be honest. I mean, in member states, we have huge attacks on LGBTI rights, but this on the level of the European Union, for example, is a done fact. In the European Union, LGBTI facts and the word gender and a number of other words are not put into question. So this, on this day, we're not going back on this. We're not going back on a number of other aspects. We are going back. It's very, very difficult on one issue, that is migration, of course, and now nature is also becoming a bit of an ideological fight, which wasn't before the case. But for example, on women's rights, I would always give this example that in this term, for the first time when amendment on abortion were included in some text, EPP would not have the collective decision to vote against. In all of the other terms, when we managed to get an amendment on abortion on a text, in any text, then there would be a general decision in EPP that you vote against the text, whatever. This term, we saw a number of EPP people, and more than half of them vote for certain texts where we had managed to get abortion wording in it. So we could see that there was a change there, and that on abortion, the EPP group is really changing. And becoming, and it's now no more taboo. And we've had just now, that's why I was a bit late, I'm coming after 3 hours votes, just in plenary now. In these 3 hour votes, we were voting on what would be the European Parliament for the main proposal for reforms for the treaties. I managed to get an amendment in it. I was told 2 months ago that I shouldn't put that amendment. I was told 1 month ago that I could put it, but we will not call to vote for it, even in my group. And it was a fight and a fight and a fight. And in the end, we did put this amendment 1 week ago. It's an amendment saying that sexual and reproductive rights need to be of the European competence. It was presented with Renew and Left and SND at basically the same ones on the. It was voted today. At the end, it didn't prevent the global voted also. So we have a proposal coming from the Parliament today, voted, which has 3 sentences at 3 different moments. The notion of sexual and reproductive rights being Jewish, that it should be European interest. So I think that shows that some topics have really become mainstream on the European level, and on that the far right is still not managing to get back on it.
Thank you so much. Now I'm turning to Stephen. I forgot to tell that we're going going around in alphabetical order. So I'm turning now to Stephen. Ms. Delbos-Corfield mentioned Giorgia Meloni, and I also think that Italy, and especially Giorgia Meloni, plays a crucial role. when we're talking about this topic. So I'm turning to you, asking, how would you briefly describe the role of Giorgia Meloni, especially, but you can also, of course, speak of other Italian parties or actors. So how do you see her role in this Eurosceptic sovereignist scene at the EU level? And do you think whether she has kind of a Europe-wide strategy, as Viktor Orbán, I think, has, or do you think that she's more going to achieve his or follow his national or individual strategy? And what do you think is her approach to cooperating with other fellow parties and with the mainstream parties?
Well, hello everybody. Thanks for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. Well, I think it's clear that Meloni will be one of the crucial actors in the next European election and after that election. Because Italy is one of the most important countries nowadays in Europe, and it's the most important government that far-right have nowadays in Europe. So I think this is a crucial point. And after the election of last year's, Brothers of Italy continue to maintain more or less the 28–30% of votes in the polls. So this is one important point. The second one, Meloni has a strategy. The point is, if she can reach the goal, so a collaboration with Weber and EPP, and to be inside or influence from outside the new commission, this is the goal of Meloni. Another point is if she can reach this goal. But then I think that is important to point out another element, that after Meloni joined the government last year, 1 year ago, in Italy, from the government, in the media, mainstream ones too, and also I think outside in other media in Europe, the idea is that Meloni is more moderate. And I think is not true, is what Meloni wants to show. I think Meloni is not moderating herself and her party, but only she is very pragmatic and smart. And she understands that if she wants to survive as a far-right government in Italy, with the economic situation of Italy and the debts that Italy has, she needs to be first very pro-NATO. And the position on Ukraine and Israel, it's quite evident. And the meeting that Meloni had with Biden and US administration in the last months. Second point, to have some kind of good relations with Brussels. So completely different compared with Salvini when he was in the government 5 years ago with Five Star Movement. So to try to have good relationship with Brussels. And this is, I think, an important point and can help us to understand the strategy of Meloni. Then I think we also should point out that Meloni is nowadays the president of ECR. And maybe after the next election, European election, Brothers of Italy will be the first party of ECR group. So that could maybe means also something in this strategy and in the possible scenario that we have. Then I also want to point out another element that I think it's important. Meloni tried to play, I think, in two directions. One is as the leader of Italian government, and nowadays, today exactly, the Italian government and German one, they are in a meeting to sign a pact between the two countries, and I think it's interesting to see how the German government seems to be, according to the media, interested in the last idea that Meloni had about the migrants and the pact with Albania as a third country. Seems to be that Scholz government seems to be, according to the media, interest in that. So there's this level of Meloni strategy, so to try to have quite good relation with different countries in Europe, and at the same time, the political level in the future Euro Parliament with ECR. And I only finish with putting out another things that links also to Spain. That is that in Italy, we have not a cordon sanitaire since 30 years ago, since Berlusconi entered politics and opened the doors to neo-fascists in that moment, the Italian social movement of Fini. And in Spain, since Vox jumped in the political scene, we have absolutely no democratic cordon sanitaire. And we can see, because in the local level, municipalities and region, we have collaboration between Partido Popular, Popular Party in Spain, and Vox. They are now in the government of 5 important regions. And after the election of 23 of July, they continue to have these good relations in the opposition now after the new government, left-wing government led by Pedro Sanchez.
Thank you so much, Stephen. Just one follow-up question, and I don't want to make any exception with you, so just please a short answer, like one sentence answer. Is there any news in the Italian press or in Italian public about the discussions between Meloni and Orbán, or ECR and Fidesz, about the possible accession of Fidesz to the ECR?
Nothing clear at the moment. Nothing clear. So I think that, as you know, Meloni has good relationship with Orbán too. She was in Budapest for the demographic summit 1 month ago, more or less. But at the same time, the main ally in Europe is the PiS and Vox. Last week, Santiago Abascal, leader of Vox, he met with Meloni in Rome. And I think it's important also to point out this very crucial relation that we had in South Europe between a far right in Spain and Italy. Both Vox and Brothers of Italy are members of ECR. And Vox also will have more MEP in the next European election, because nowadays have always only 4 MEP. And according to polls and the votes of the last election, we will have around 8 or 9 Vox MIP in the next European Parliament.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for your great points. Now I'm turning to Zsuzsanna Vég. Stephen mentioned or described Giorgia Meloni's strategy vis-a-vis European institutions, and that her kind of key point is to have a good relationship with Brussels and with other member states. Now I think the Hungarian government has a somewhat different strategy. So could you please briefly describe how your view of the Orbán regime's main strategy and goals concerning fellow Eurosceptic, sovereignist, and populist radical right parties, please?
Thank you, Uchu. I think the observation that the Hungarian strategy is very, very different from that of Italy, of Meloni, is obvious. So for the past decade, the relationship between the Hungarian government and the European institutions have been becoming worse and worse. And as we know, it deteriorated also on the inter-party level to the extent that Fidesz decided to leave EPP before it is excluded, in the hopes that it can also bring about some sort of cooperation between ECR and ID. And over the past 1.5 years, we see that this cooperation is not exactly progressing in the direction that he would have preferred. So his initial strategy in how to position Fidesz and how to kind of reclaim a formative role for Hungary within Europe for the moment has failed. Obviously, we know the reason, the differences on Russia. Now, if we just look back a couple days of the developments of Hungarian politics, I think it's very informative in how the Fidesz strategy will look like ahead of the EP elections and what are going to be the main points, whereas Meloni is pursuing a strategy of building somewhat cordial ties both with EU institutions and with the EPP. Fidesz is confrontative, absolutely confrontative with EU institutions, with Brussels. The main campaign topics of the party are going to be around Brussels attacking Hungary on various issues, and Fidesz being in the position of the defender of Hungarian sovereignty. Just last night, the party submitted a bill on the protection of national sovereignty. So as opposed to Meloni, here we definitely see confrontation. We see very strong hard Euroscepticism. However, Fidesz is still not calling for Hungary's exit from the European Union. So it still tries to position itself more towards parties who are typically the stronger radical parties in Europe who would like to reform the EU from within. I believe that the strategy beyond this massive confrontation is still to try to build some relations rather towards ECR than ID from Orbán's side, precisely because of the reasons that we have been discussing. It's hugely attractive to have a governing party partner in a political group, and as long as Meloni is in ECR and we have this setup, it is more likely that ECR is going to be able to influence European politics, which is what Orbán wants to do himself. Rudolf was also mentioning the cordon sanitaire, but we have also heard about from also Ms. Dalbos-Corfield how there is a cooperation actually between EPP and ECR. So there is indeed a cordon sanitaire towards ID, but no longer towards ECR. And this is one of the reasons why I still believe that Fidesz would try to pursue that track to find its place in ECR if possible, because it pays much more dividends than joining ID. I do think that this would be the number one option from the perspective of Fidesz. And the alternative of potentially joining ID might still be somewhat contentious even for Orbán. No longer because of cooperation with Le Pen. We see that that's no longer a problem for Fidesz. Let's just recall Hungarian bank close to government circles providing a loan for Le Pen's campaign. So whereas several years back it wouldn't have been still conceivable even for Orbán, now it's not an issue. But in ID we still have AFD, which is a growing party. As it has been mentioned, AFD's growth is what's going to probably compensate for the losses of Lega. So AFD is going to be a formative partner party in identity and democracy, which may still be contentious for Orbán in light of the fact that relations with Germany are crucial for Hungary. And there is, of course, the third option for Orbán, not joining any of the political groups and sitting among the non-allied for the coming 5 years. I do think it's not a favored option for the party. Nonetheless, it might not be one that we can exclude. Under the current circumstances, it's no longer just Fidesz's call where it can join, as opposed to 2 years ago. It could have probably joined ECR upon leaving EPP. Now it's no longer that straightforward. In that regard, it's going to be very important to watch how relations develop between PIS and Fidesz once PIS is officially in opposition in Poland. Whether it's going to make Fidesz even more toxic, it is conceivable that PIS supporters would punish a rapprochement between PIS and Fidesz. And when you are in opposition, what you need to maintain is definitely your voter base. So it can be risky, but it might also be that it can be kept more under the radar in this situation. So that dynamic will be crucial. And this is something that I'm certain that Orbán will continue to work on various levels in the months to come.
Thank you so much for your points, very important issues you raised. And with this, I'm turning to Carolina. Law and justice has been mentioned a couple of times already in this discussion. I think it's clear why they are playing a crucial role at the European level, being one of the co-chairs of the ECR group, and also what Zsuzsanna has just brought up. The also perspective of Fidesz joining ECR may depend also on PIS say. So my question to you is, what do you think will be PIS strategy after losing the national elections in Poland and ahead of the European elections? So what will be PIS strategy concerning fellow Eurosceptic, sovereignist, populist, radical right parties? And of course, as a Hungarian, but also I think from the European perspective, it would be interesting to know your take on what PIS approach will be to Fidesz possibly joining ECR.
Good afternoon. It's great to be here, and I hope that you can hear me well. Maybe I will start with also congratulating you for the great report. However, I have one question, because when you were mentioning the values and ideas that unite different far-right populists and populist far-right politicians, I don't think that you mentioned conservatism, because in my view, it's one of those ideologies, maybe not conservatives, but ultra conservatism, including patriarchy, national church, and the ultimate value of the typical family as one of the major tropes, at least in Poland, but as far as I know, it's also more generalistic characteristic of populist far-right groups. And it's also what is being espoused by our Law and Justice Party. And as it was said, we tend to cooperate a lot and have meetings between our still government led by Mateusz Morawiecki. He's still a prime minister. He hasn't gathered a new government. Probably he won't manage to do that, but he's a prime minister again for the time being, probably for the next 2-3 weeks. And there were several meetings around Europe of ECR group. So already then we were all talking about this populist international, or at least European populist international. But there are also these meetings between Mateusz Morawiecki and Viktor Orbán that were mentioned. And actually in the policies of law and justice, it was mainly the Orbán's playbook that had been followed by our peace leaders since 2015. Jarosław Kaczyński once even said that he wanted to build Budapest on the Vistula River. The problem, in my view, with populist far right of cooperating together and, for example, somehow uniting the ID group with the ECR is the leadership challenge, because none of the populists would like to give out their power. So the problem with Orbán and Fidesz in the ECR would be who now will be ruling the European ECR group. So I think that's the major challenge. Of course, there is the challenge of being supportive of Russia and being blocking several actions undertaken by NATO and European Union to support Ukraine by Fidesz. But just before the elections in Poland, actually Fidesz and the Polish Peace Party friendship has been reignited. They were meeting. The Fidesz spin dictator. Sorry. Now I'm quoting the book by Sergei Guriev that I wanted to mention today. But spin doctors of Fidesz were visiting peace headquarters in Poland and supporting the general strategy in our parliamentary campaign that was run by Law and Justice. For example, Jarosław Kaczyński in June proposed the referendum that was actually in the end organized along with the general elections on the 15th of October, and it was also the direct following on the playbook of Viktor Orbán. But it didn't bring enough results. But I don't know if you are aware, there were some research done that showed that also there were funds that were flowing in directly from the Orbán's government that were supporting the anti-immigrant campaign 2-3 weeks before our parliamentary elections date. So, as I said before, we had troubles because Viktor Orbán was flirting with Vladimir Putin and also was friendly with China. But at the same time, there are elections and you need to have strong supporters who also support your very effective political agenda. And one of the effective agendas that made peace win actually in 2015, so it pays, is this anti-immigrant xenophobic policies. So now on that, they will certainly cooperate, and they will cooperate on whatever is pragmatic, but I'm not sure that they want to be in one political group together, because there is too many strongman leaders, even if one of the strongmen is Giorgia Meloni. So strong woman and strong man, too many to decide who should be the leader. There is also ID party, but there is probably the same. There is Le Pen, there is AfD that is growing, as you were mentioning, growing in support. There is also the Austrian FPÖ who are growing. So this leadership challenge is a real problem and might be a blocking thing in terms of their setting up one real coalition.
Thank you, Karolina. Just one follow-up question, which was actually raised by Zsuzsanna. What do you think, or what do you think, whether Fidesz has become too contagious for law and justice in Poland to publicly cooperate more closely, or it's not the case?
I'm sorry, I must say I don't fully understand the question.
Could you sorry.
rephrase it?
Yeah, sure. So do you think that like publicly cooperating with Fidesz has become too dangerous for law and justice in terms of, you know, Polish public support for Ukraine?
I don't think so. I think now there are even data, sociological data about it. Many citizens outside of the bubble that I belong to, and without reading this social research results, I wouldn't be aware of that there is a strong sentiment in Poland, maybe not against Ukraine, but against continuing support for Ukraine. It is why PiS just before the elections also changed their Ukraine-friendly supportive narrative into being, you know, pragmatic and saying that now we will be weakening our support, military support for Ukraine because we need to take care of our own national defense. So no, I don't think that it's a challenge for this cooperation. The bigger challenge is pro-Russian stance, but not being anti-Ukrainian.
Right. Thank you so much for clarifying this. Okay, so and now in the second turn, I again would turn to or address my first question to Ms. Delbos-Corfield. You talked about that you're not such a defeatist like your social democratic colleagues in the European Parliament. So my question would be, to what extent you think the polls are credible in this point of time, and what do you think will be or maybe a potential outcome of the elections, and what do you think will be the kind of consequences or scenarios after the elections in terms of forming groups in the European Parliament? Do you, for instance, can you expect, or would you expect that the existing groups will reform or like reshuffle, and new groups will be formed on the basis of the current one? So can we expect, or can we make calculations based on the current groups, for instance, or shall we think about possible new groups to be formed? And what do you think you mentioned that there is already cooperation between the ECR and the EPP group. What do you think it will will it continue, and what can we expect in this regard? Thank you.
Yeah, I will not be bold enough to make big prediction. I think the particularity of the political times we are living in since 5 years and even maybe a decade is that we are in very moving political landscapes, and it's usually very difficult to predict. And I think that we've seen that an acceleration in the fact that elections have nearly the last time never gone exactly as we had seen. I mean, I'm looking very closely to the Dutch election, and things have been changing from 2 days to 2 days. So it's quite difficult to say. What I'm sure of, on the other hand, is that when institutions and politics fails us, it is citizens and civil society that manages the challenges. And I think that today we do have a big problem with the political world not being at the level of the citizens' aspiration and work. And I think that the election in Poland showed that. Of course, this figure, Donald Tusk, was part of the equation. Of course, the fact that they managed to do this platform and even have this second big group next to them, they were having this non-aggression pact, and all this did also a lot. But what mostly made the shift in Poland is the actions of civil society, specifically women organization being very involved and really going to get the women's vote. And what changed in Poland is the mobilization and the participation. It was high score of participation, very high score, with a lot of women and youth. If we don't go to mobilize these people, indeed, the next elections are not going to be good. That's for sure. I mean, if we do count on those that take the time to go to vote. In France, for example, it has really become very old people of a certain color of skin and living in a certain world. So it's very clear who goes to vote. And the last presidents have all been elected by a generation that is over 50. So we do have a lot of work to be done on that. And I think that should be one of the goals of the next European election, and it's not at all one of them. In 2019, there was really this big work done by the Fridays for Climate organization, and they did mobilize people to go to vote, youth to go to vote to European election on the climate issue, and it functioned. It was not miraculous, but it did make a big difference. So if we don't have this again in 2024, I'm very concerned, but I don't think it's because our society is becoming worse and worse. On the contrary, I think our society is in fact becoming less homophobic, less racist, less misogynistic, but the ones that go to votes are not these ones. About the next configuration, I think that we are seeing, I'm not sure there will be great changes in the groups in European Parliament, sadly, but I do think that we're seeing an evolution. As I said, the gender issue, for example, is now a much more common issue. The ecological issue is a much more common issue. We will then not agree with the Renew people on how we get to that. The Renew people will be in a very technological solution. We will be more in a sobriety solution, and SND will be in the between of us. But basically, we do have today a lot of people. Since this term, we have seen the gender and ecology are very common issue for three to four groups, and even in EPP. I think we will have more and more debates in each group. That is probably one of the things. The groups were used to having very different votes. It's always been the case. The Social Democrats, in EPP, in the Liberals, you will have very different votes. And we were putting that a bit on having the excuse of the background, cultural background and country background. More and more groups are seeing that this is becoming a problem because it is creating ideological divide. It is making some votes very unsure in the parliament and all this. So I think that in EPP, there is more and more debate between the more centrist liberal people and the ones that have gone very far to the right, and those that really want to indeed incorporate people like Meloni. And all of this. I think that the Polish election, we haven't seen yet the main consequences because we're in the very beginning, but it will fragilize peace a lot in the parliament. It also means that it has also shown that indeed we can reverse situations, which is psychologically and symbolically very important. I've already had people coming to me saying to me, young people especially coming to me, Poland is the example where democracy has functioned because they reverted the situation. And don't you think that it would be possible for Hungary? So it has created hope. And I think that it will also have this effect in the European Union. And it will also, of course, have the effect that it's a symbolic partner of Fidesz on certain difficult decisions that won't be there anymore. So I mean, it means that Fidesz now has to count on Slovakia and Fico, but they don't agreeing on everything, and we won't have this peace Fidesz alliance. I do hope that it will fragilize Fidesz a lot, and I do hope that it will bring the council to be more courageous. This I have not seen yet the effect because I'm going to be very blunt and honest. The Spanish presidency is very, very weak. It's a very bad presidency. I think it's the worst that I've seen since Slovenia and Janša. So they're not acting. But with the Belgium, I think that we will see if Belgium is capable of mobilizing countries and isolating Orbán even more. I know that they have this in their mind. So maybe that will have also effects.
Thank you so much. Stephen,
I just wanted to say that I think that to the last question that you asked, I do think that Ukraine is no more going to be a dividing big topic, indeed, in the far right, and it's not going to put on one side the pro-Russian and the against Russian, because it's becoming complicated for everyone, and then Israel-Palestine came into it. But I do think that, on the other hand, Fidesz interfering in the Polish election and making them lose, Fidesz coming out with this awful national sovereignty consultation that is just starting to being talked about, but is 11 questions about Brussels, very bad questions, and all of this. I think that it's not going to be very good, neither for Meloni, neither for peace in the next month, to use Orbán and shine next to Orbán. I think that Orbán is doing so many steps in different areas, and indeed it's no more Ukraine, but in other different areas, very bad, that it's not at the moment the best idea to be around Orbán. Sorry for this.
No, not at all. Thank you so much for this addition. And I think it's not only, I mean, in Hungary at least, it's not only, or it's not mainly the consultation that you mentioned, but it's the sovereignty, the so-called Sovereignty Act, which was submitted to the parliament yesterday evening. I think we don't have time to discuss it now, and it's not our topic, but anyway. So now I'm turning to Stephen. You mentioned that Meloni is not kind of moderating or softening her approach. And Carolina mentioned that ultra-conservatism is probably a common ideology of these actors and parties. And I wanted to ask you, and Rudolf mentioned in his presentation that kind of below the seemingly common narratives, when we look kind of deeper into policies or into policy stances, we can see differences among these parties. And I wanted to ask you about what do you think about that? I mean, gender, for instance, is one of the key issue that kind of bridges Fidesz and also, of course, law and justice, and also Giorgia Meloni. As you mentioned, Giorgia Meloni was in Budapest for the Demographic Forum. So this is kind of an export something that the Hungarian government tries to export to other countries. But when it comes to immigration, for instance, all of these parties have a very harsh anti-immigration stance. But when it comes to details, there are, I would say, crucial differences among these parties. So what do you think, what kind of narratives or what kind of policies can these parties agree upon, whether they can, will there be kind of a common campaign of these parties based on similar topics, similar narratives, and how can these parties cooperate in practice in the European Parliament, or probably at the European Council's table when they come to be sitting there, with regards to their differences in terms of policies?
Yeah, it's a good point, because finally they are nationalist or ultra-nationalist parties. So there's some point where nationalists, they could not be friends. And the point of the migration issue is evident, because for Italy or Spain, the situation is very different compared with Hungary or Poland. Well, Poland, in the last years with the Ukrainian war, there's more than 1 million refugees, but it's different because they are Catholic and white, no? So that's the point. I think in any case that this kind of party, and I'm talking about ECR and ID parties, all the far extreme right party of nowadays, they could continue to have the same rhetoric until they are in the government. Well, they continue to have the same rhetoric too in the government, but then they have the problems to apply policies. So during the campaign to the European Union, I think will be for them not a clear contradiction on that. So Meloni as Vox, Meloni is in the government, Vox no. And then in Hungary and Poland, this party continued to sell the discourse to stop migrants, to close the borders, etc., etc. And you know, the populist rhetoric and populist style to do politics could permit them to don't talk about real solution or real policies that could be apply in the national state and in the European context. So I think will be not a problem for them it was not a problem in the last 10 years, if you take a look. So I don't think so will be a problem. I want also to point out another thing that I think is interesting, talking about the Italian case, that as you know, we have a struggle for hegemony in the far right between Meloni and Salvini. At the beginning, 2019 seems to be that Salvini won that battle. Then last year seems very clear that Meloni finally won, and Salvini seems to be a bit out. But Salvini is in the government too, and he need in the next election to try to have better results to maintain the party and to maintain the leadership. So Salvini, as we saw in the last years, he tried to, and he will try to, also in the following months, to have a strong rhetoric, more, if you want, Eurosceptic, more critical to Brussels, to like put in a corner Meloni and to gain the support of the more radical voters. So this point could also create some problems to Meloni policies in the government and also to Meloni relationship in Europe. I think this is interesting. And the last point I want to talk about very quickly is Carolina, before talking about conservatism, I'm completely agree. And I think also to talk about the transnational network, I think it's very important to mention the national conservatives that are linked to the Edmund Burke Foundation, to the ECR group, very well connected with the right sectors, or well, better, far right sectors of the Tories and the GOP in the States, and that try also to have a part of Likud in Israel, very good relations also with some new far right in Latin America. Let's see with Milei, but with Cast from Chile is quite well linked to all this network. And I think that to finish is important because when I talked before about the strategy of Meloni wants to present herself as a moderate, as a good conservative, not a far rightist. And the National Conservatism Network is just working to offer to that parties a cultural and political background to create all this kind of discourse. So figures and intellectuals and thinkers as Yoram Azoni, that is the founder of the Edmund Burke Foundation, and at the same time the president of Herzl Institute in Israel, but then also Richard Legutko in Poland, or young thinkers close to Meloni as Francesco Giubilei. They are taking Roger Scruton thought, or other figures that not soon seems to be like neo-fascist or extreme rightist thinkers or politicians, to offer this new cultural basis, political cultural basis, to convert conservatism in the national conservatism that is something that is far right. And so this is also important to think about the possible collaboration with EPP in European level and in the national context, because in this point, this idea that conservatism is what is far right today and not what was conservatism after the Second World War, to be clear, offer the possibility to EPP parties to find a link and collaborate and have no problem to have alliance with this party. And I think that Meloni, to finish, is crucial also in this network and in this strategy to find this kind of collaboration.
Thank you so much, Stephen, for bringing this up. I think also from the Hungarian perspective, these international networks are very important. The Hungarian government has also invested a huge amount of money and efforts to organize such events. to kind of advertise their policies, their ideas. Zsuzsanna, would you like to mention or speak about this? Because I think it's really important from the Hungarian perspective. Otherwise, I would ask you, what do you think in the next, or what we can expect in the next 5 years in terms of common goals, strategies, coordinated approaches from these parties in the European Parliament or in general?
Yes, maybe to start with a couple additions to the development of this political, intellectual background. Indeed, as Bulcsú, you mentioned, Fidesz has invested massively into this, not just on the level of networking various thinkers, parties, and developing a narrative and ideological, intellectual ideological background that kind of frames this far-right thought as national conservatism, but also on the level of, if you will, raising next generations in these organizations. This whole development of an intellectual background, by the way, very much resonates with what we have seen back in the day with the Nouvelle Droite and Alain de Benoit. And we now see that sort of intellectualization of far-right politics as well. But regarding the institutions, what we do see through the Hungarian example is that on the one hand, they do serve this networking and legitimization internationally. On the other hand, the very same organizations, and here I'm, for example, talking about the Matthias Corvinus College, serves also to raise the next generation of politicians and also eventually civil servants, state administration for Fidesz in this intellectual bubble. And yes, we shouldn't forget about the transatlantic connection there, CPAC, but also we can gradually, increasingly look at Latin America too. The next 5 years question, ultimately, I think the experience of Brexit really pushed these parties away from the idea of advocating for the dissolution of the European Union. Nonetheless, they are increasingly united around the idea of pushing for a Europe of nation states and reforming the European Union from within. So I think, and as there is increasing talk about treaty reforms, this is going to be a topic around which we can definitely see, if not automatic convergence, but I would expect exchange of ideas and thematization of in what direction the Union should develop. And as issues like enlargement, the question of QMV voting is on the table. These are going to be topics where several radical right parties will be pushing back. So general, the future of Europe, reform of European institutions is, I think, one topic where we can definitely expect them to try to influence the debate. We have talked about conservatism. So generally, the idea of identity politics, generally speaking, is going to be something that, again, can bring them closer together, but it's not an EU policy area. So this, I think, is something like migration, where they can, on the rhetorical level, all unite. But as opposed to migration, here there is very limited space for actual policy making within the EU, which means that this can remain an issue that will continue to unite these parties because they will not clash on the practicalities. Whereas in the case of migration, the narrative, the grand narrative remains, but on practicalities, we will see clashes. We do see clashes, while at the same time, the EP and the Commission's proposals itself increasingly reflect a mainstreaming of radical right ideas, which remains a danger. It is going to be very interesting to see how these initial dynamics will develop in the second half of next year, especially during the Hungarian EU presidency, how the Commission is going to be set up, to what extent the Hungarian government will play a constructive role in any way, or will be blocking and delaying the establishment of the new institutions. But around these issues, I do expect that in cooperation with especially ECC parties, there will be an attempt to steer institution building in this form in a more right-wing direction.
Thank you so much. We'll not have too much time, but still I wanted to ask one more question to Carolina, and then we have two questions in the Q&A section. So my brief question is to you, Carolina. You mentioned that Law and Justice is still in government in the form of a caretaking government. And Ms. Delbos-Corfield mentioned that Law and Justice may be galvanized or paralyzed in the parliament, in the European Parliament, due to the results in the national elections in October in Poland. So what do you think, or are there any signs already concerning Law and Justice strategy for the next term, especially in the European Parliament, but maybe also in Poland?
We also have regional elections in April, so straight after the results of the 15th of October parliamentary elections were known, Law and Justice has begun their new double electoral campaign for the regional elections and for the European Parliament. We could have seen that also including the answer to your question about the agenda. It was actually set out in the inaugural speech of the Mateusz Morawiecki at the first sitting of our new parliament, Sejm. So he said that soon the EU will take away our sovereignty and decides on taxes in Poland and many more, and the Poles won't be able to say anything. It was generally, the whole speech, the whole expose was focusing on the anti-European Union sentiment. So I think that it will be the guiding theme of the next two electoral campaigns that are I mentioned, apart from the ideas, ideologies, and narratives that you were mentioned in your report and in what I said before. So anti-gender, anti-LGBTIQ agenda, anti-liberal, but mostly even anti-pluralism agenda. So it's already also seen, it's equating the new government to come. So all democratic forces to foreign forces, to traitors that are selling Poland to Germany and Brussels. And even when Agnieszka Holland made her movie green border. She was actually joining Donald Tusk in being equal with a German traitor, German power that is infringing on stealing the Polish sovereignty and selling it very cheaply away. There is also, as I mentioned, the anti-migration sentiment, which is a constant since 2015. When there is less migrants, less problems on this issue, then they are looking more into this anti-LGBT and anti-gender agenda. But at the moment, the ground anti-immigration, xenophobic ground is very fertile. So for sure, they will go on that. Anti-Brussels, as I said, is the major sentiment for the European Union elections, EP elections. Anti-climate policies, very much. Yes, and in general, this nativist ultra-conservatism. So this is the agenda, very scary, very radical, very, very sad, but they see that it pays. So even on that, they still won the most votes during the elections, although not enough to set up the majority, but it was still around 35, and they are still enjoying the constant 35%, while Civic Platform led by Donald Tusk are still on 31 percentage points.
Thank you so much. That you mentioned sovereignty and how Mateusz Morawiecki spoke about sovereignty is very much similar to how the Hungarian government is speaking about Brussels and Brussels taking sovereignty of Hungary and letting Hungarians pay more debts or more taxes and so on and so forth. But anyway, now I'm coming to the questions asked by our audience in the Q&A section, and there are two of them. Both of them unfortunately concerns Hungarian issues or Hungary-related issues. One question is about the Hungary potentially leaving the EU and whether Orbán prepares for leaving the EU. What do you think about that? And the other question concerns the Sovereignty Act, which was submitted to Parliament yesterday. So I'm not really sure that you have enough information on that act or in that law. But the question is whether support within the European Union, so kind of second country support, so support from one member state to another member state, or one entity in a member state to another entity in another member state, whether this is legal under the EU law, and whether the Hungarian government can pass any law which would counter that kind of support within the European Union. If anyone wants to take any of these questions, please.
Yeah, I can maybe start. Just to say that since the very first day I became rapporteur on the topic on the situation in Hungary, so since 2019, and of course, I don't know before, I've heard that Viktor Orbán will leave EU. I have not seen this arrive, and it was every year. And every time that he does a very bad thing, it's, oh, because behind he has this idea. I really think that it's not in the interest of Orbán, contrary of what is written in the question, but I'm not sure. I mean, it was maybe provocative, but I don't think that Orbán can at all live through Russian and Chinese money. I don't think that at all. Knowing another country, Serbia, which does have more investment of Russia and specifically China, it still is far from being what the EU investments are, and we are only in a candidate member state. And Serbia is always in very big ambiguity, because Vučić is in a very big ambiguity because he doesn't want to lose on each side. So the fact that Viktor Orbán is trying to win on each side, for sure, but I really don't think that he will make quickly the move to go out of EU, and specifically I don't think that he will do it after this national consultation, because I think that what he wants is to wait for these famous next election. And I think that the bet that Orbán made is much more that the next elections will be much more in his favor, be it in member states, so in the council, be it in commission, be it, of course, in the European Parliament. And I think that he's looking at that more than the rest, and he's looking for a more lenient parliament, a more lenient commission, and a more lenient council. He has also clearly understood that the money will be frozen. I mean, we've had there again a debate yesterday, still in the parliament, on the freezing of Hungarian funds. On this, the parliament is very united, and EPP is very strong. So there's no weakness foreseen in the EPP. ECR doesn't take the topic at all on board, so they're not fighting for it. So nobody's fighting for Hungary at the moment. The member states neither, and in the commission, clearly they're not comfortable, but they're not acting either. So I think that Orbán knows that it's going to be very difficult to have the money, that so he's making less and less effort indeed, but I don't think that that means that he's going to leave. And I think that he's already done this sort of consultation. He's already done the job of the big billboards, and he knows that EU doesn't react. So why would he not use that narrative in his own country? But that doesn't mean that he's going to leave. And I think that this is really a big failure on the EU side, sort of billboards. Juncker last time, this time Ursula von der Leyen. I mean, it seems that every 4 years we will have the same just before European elections, and Commission just says, okay, it's not my problem. On the other question, on the sovereignty, what I understand will be very problematic and very difficult is, of course, so I think it's going to be difficult indeed to prove that this sovereignty law is a problem. I also think that the fact that there is a will to make the political money more transparent, where does it come from, and all this. I mean, I come from a country where the rules are very strict, probably one of the strictest in EU, and I always find it very bizarre that in Germany, Total and Shell and the car industry can pay whatever they want, and money can come from USA and blah blah and blah blah. Indeed, in France, all of this is not possible. So it won't be possible to criticize that aspect. The question is how much this can affect the civil society and be very close to an anti-Soros law and all of these different things that we've already seen the Orbán government try in these last 10 years. And that could maybe indeed be an infringement and could see procedures, but we need to know more about this and indeed if it prevents civil society to act on politicization of the society, then we are in another domain that just the framing of political money. And I think that that's what we all are concerned about, how much it will prevent civil society to act on very politicized debate, but still as civil society. And on this, maybe there's a way to act. But to agree with the person that asked the question, I think there's one thing that the Hungarians are very good with is to write laws that are very delicate for the EU institution and the EU Court of Justice to attack. On this, they've always been much better than the Polish were, for example. So indeed, it might be very tricky for us to find a way.
Thank you so much. I've seen that Stephen raised his hand. I don't know whether no. Okay. Carolina, yes. Just before that, there is the last question. This is the last question. We take another question popped up in the Q&A section, asking about the attitudes within the EPP itself in terms of tactical cooperation with the radical right in the EP, and in terms of an EPP shift rightwards and growing policy agreement with the radical right. I think we touched upon that in the panel already, but if there are any more thoughts on that. Yes, Stephen, I can see your hand. But first, Carolina, please.
Okay, thank you. I think that Stephen was first, but still, thank you very much. So on the Hungarian exit from the EU, I think that Viktor Orbán has become really comfortable with always being halfway in between, to say it in very short way, between Putin and the European Union. He managed to orchestrate the full-scale liberal democracy capture while being in the European Union. So I think that what is very important is that the European Union effectively uses its conditionality mechanism in order to actually really try to prevent countries that go on illiberal paths with closing access to the European Union money, because he was doing the capture as Law and Justice was doing it, while at the same time benefiting from all the pluses of being in the European Union. So it's just unjust and unfair towards also the others and the countries that we are inviting to the European Union. European Union, in my view, at the moment, is the only check and balance left for the Hungary. So I hope that it is being used, and I think that if this conditionality mechanism is being effectively used towards Hungary, when the money is not flowing there, then Viktor Orbán might really consider the exit of Hungary, because then it wouldn't pay probably. The second question about EPP. So Manfred Weber, its leader, has been flirting, as we already mentioned, with Giorgia Meloni and ECR. There were several very concrete policies here. So, for example, the initiative to fund the border walls from the EU money. The other ones were co-supporting initiatives against the Green Deal of the European Union, and also generally catering to farmers' community, but it was related to that blocking of the initiatives of Green Deal. But as it was already mentioned, there is this cordon sanitaire and some political forces from the democratic sides. For example, socialists and Democrats won't allow uniting and closer cooperation even within the coalition with the ECR.
Thank you, Karolina. Stephen?
Very quick about this last point about the EPP. It's true that there's a discussion inside EPP, but what seems to me is that Donald Tusk or also CDU, there are the exception nowadays in the so-called mainstream right, that they maintain in a cordon sanitaire. Things that, for example, a so-called moderate as Mariano Rajoy, ex-premier in Spain for the PP, decided to officially support Javier Milei during the last election in Argentina. And we are talking about Rajoy that was considered a moderate inside the PP party in Spain. So I think this is a very important things to point out. Or for example, also nowadays after the new Sanchez government in Spain, PP decided to spread like a campaign to defend supposedly the state of real in Spain against Sanchez and the Catalan independentists, and the campaign was called Help Spain, and they compared Sanchez with Viktor Orbán. So we are talking about a party member of EPP and that don't condemn the violence that since 3 weeks in outside the headquarters of a socialist party in Madrid, some neo-fascists, neo-phalangists with the support of Vox, they are doing each night. So it's Spain, but then take a look of Italy. In Italy, doesn't exist a mainstream right. Well, there is Forza Italia, but Forza Italia, I think, for one hand, is not a mainstream right since the beginning, and nowadays is like the shadow of the party of Berlusconi. And after Berlusconi's death, I don't think that Forza Italia continue to exist during a long time, and they will have probably 4 or 5 MIP in the next European Parliament. And to finish, and also take a look of France, Les Républicains, they are very weak, and they are open nowadays, since the last year minimum, to pact with Le Pen or maybe Zemmour. Let's see. So I think this is the big point. There's a strong radicalization of the mainstream right that they could accept the alliance and the discourse, and they buy mostly the discourse of the far right, also because they are the sickest party nowadays in Europe. The so-called center-right is the biggest, sickest party of Europe, more than Social Democrats, I think. We are usually talking about the problems of the Social Democrats. It's true, compared with like 20 years ago. But in broadly speaking, it's the sickest party, I think, the EPP nowadays in Europe. And it's something different compared with 20 or 30 years ago. So let's see, because I think it's one of the most point. And as an historian, and I'm really shut up now, we can maybe have some parallelism with the so-called authoritarian compromise that in the 20s and the 30s, the conservative had with the fascists in that time. It's something different nowadays, but with this kind of alliance, when you have a competitor on your far right that bring you on the far right too. So I think this is I think the point for the next European 5 years after the election.
Thank you so much, Steven, for these important points. Zsuzsanna, would you take the floor? Would you like to take the floor, or?
Thank you. Just very briefly. Steven said pretty much everything that I would say on the EPP and cooperation between center, mainstream right, and radical right, and I absolutely agree with that, and I think that's a major danger. You don't need to officially cooperate if you co-opt, and that is what's happening. And the problem with this is that these shifts remain. And this alters the entire political discourse, and ultimately, as a result, also policymaking, and that's a big problem. But I wanted to add just very briefly to the question of this national consultation in Hungary and Huxit, and also we are talking a lot about the frozen EU funds. Ultimately, I think what Orbán is doing with this consultation is kicking off the campaign for the elections. These are clearly the themes that will rule our world for the coming 7 months. And he's mobilizing. Also, we need to have in mind that we are roughly halfway between the elections. This is when typically support for Fidesz starts to drop. So he's mobilizing his base again. And many of the topics that are challenging for his government, like economic difficulties, are very conveniently, of course, blamed on Brussels. And there is the convenient connection to the EU funds as well. But when it comes to Orbán being able to finance him staying in power from China and Russia, I also doubt that. And that's only a fraction of the picture. And also talking about just the cohesion funds that are suspended is just a fraction of the picture. Yes, Orbán is very calculative about costs and benefits of Hungary's EU membership. And I do believe that he still draws more from being a member, but not just because of the funds. That's one thing, but also the fact that Hungary is within the EU is still giving access to the country to the internal market. This is a massive supporting factor for all the investors who are still present in the country. And it would be really risky to pull the plug on that, to leave the European Union. That would have major consequences, not only on the incoming EU funds, but also on the trust in the Hungarian political system, which is anyhow weakened. And I second the thought that being in the EU is still a check on the Hungarian government. And I think businesses consider that as well. So leaving the European Union is not only losing out on EU funds, but also immediately getting horrible credit ratings, which would dunk the economy. This would also mean no more free movement for Hungarian people within the Union. These are not. This is not a price that I think Orbán at this point is willing and able to pay. So the cohesion funds are, yes, a major factor, but we shouldn't forget about all the other benefits that are there even when the funds are suspended.
Thank you so much, Zsuzsi. Just to quickly follow up on this, and with this, I would also like to close this discussion and this event. I also think that economic consequences are a major issue in this regard. I mean, the whole Hungarian economy is based on being member of the European Union. Leaving the European Union would mean on the very next day that all of those foreign companies that are based in Hungary, because we're part of the internal market, would leave Hungary. It would have increasing additional administrative and financial burden. So it would, I think, the Hungarian economy would collapse on the next day after leaving the EU. Anyway, with this, I would really like to thank to our great panelists for being with us on this day, and also, of course, I would like to sincerely thank to our audience, and also for having the patience for this delay of about 20 minutes. So we very much appreciate your presence, and I think it was a very insightful discussion with great and crucial inputs, and I really would like to thank again for our great panelists for being with us, for sharing their thoughts. I definitely have learned a lot today. So thank you again. We will publish our study very soon in November still. We will share it with all those who participated in this event today. And also we would like to ask for your views on this event. We will share also an evaluation questionnaire today or tomorrow maybe. So please share your thoughts with us in order or for us to be able to improve our events in the future. So again, thank you so much for being with us today, and have a great evening. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.